Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at something huge, Filipino international migration.
It really is a global story.
Yeah, and we're using the article A Snapshot of Filipino International Migration to sort of guide us through the experiences of Filipinos working abroad. We know you want to get up to speed quickly, but also properly understand things, so that's the plan. Key insights, maybe some surprising facts, but without, getting bogged down.
And the scale is it's immense. We're talking over 8.23 million Filipinos working overseas.
8 million?
Yeah, in more than 190 countries. And to really get why, think about the Philippines itself. The median age is super young, like 22, 23.
Wow.
So you have this massive wave of young people needing jobs and, well, the economy back home, it struggles to provide enough opportunities for everyone. That's a huge push factor, obviously.
Right, that makes sense. Economic pressure.
Yeah.
And the source, it helps break down these overseas Filipinos into categories, right?
Exactly. Three main groups. First, you've got your permanent immigrants, or settlers, about 3.5 million of them.
Okay, and where are they mostly settling?
Primarily the big ones, U.S., Canada, Australia, Japan, UK, and Germany.
Got it. Permanent. Group 2.
That's the temporary migrants, usually called overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs. That's the biggest group, around 3.8 million.
Okay, OFWs. And they're concentrated elsewhere.
Yeah, traditionally places like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Hong Kong, Japan. But increasingly we're seeing Italy and Spain pop up too.
Interesting. Okay, and the third group?
This one's harder to pin down exact numbers for, but it's the undocumented or unauthorized workers. The estimate is over 800,000. So still a very significant number.
Definitely. Over 750,000 people.
And what's really interesting, or perhaps concerning, is how immigration policies often push people towards contract work. It can be really hard to get permanent work permits in many places.
So they end up in temporary contracts instead.
Often, yes, especially in parts of Asia, the Middle East, Western Europe. And these jobs, well, they're frequently what people call the 3D jobs.
3D.
Dirty, difficult, and dangerous.
Ah.
And this reliance on contracts, it means many Filipinos are in pretty precarious situations, employment-wise. Even if they have skills, they might not get to settle permanently.
So they can earn, maybe go home, but not really build a life there with family.
Exactly. The contracts allow them to come and go, but permanent settlement with family is often off the table because of those visa restrictions. It highlights a real power imbalance in global labor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source mentions a lot of women are in these situations, right? Particularly domestic work.
Yes, a very significant number, working as housemaids, nannies. Domestica is the term in Italy, for instance.
And there's a whole controversy. This detail really stood out to me about dictionaries.
Oh, right. Yeah, the article points that out. Late 80s, early 90s, apparently both the Oxford English Dictionary and a Greek dictionary actually included definitions for Filipino that linked the term specifically to domestic help.
That's nuts.
It is startling, and it really underscores a certain perception, maybe a stereotype, from that time. Of course, it's crucial to stress, as the source does, that Filipino migration is way more diverse than that. It covers a huge range of skills and professions.
Definitely. But that dictionary thing is quite a snapshot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shows how views can form and hopefully evolve.
Exactly. It's a historical marker. And speaking of history, to really understand how we got to this point with over 8 million people abroad, the source talks about 3 distinct waves of migration.
Okay, let's get into that. Wave 1.
This goes way, way back. Like the earliest recorded migration mention is a trade mission to China in 1417.
1417. Wow. Okay, not what I expected.
Right. Then jump forward a bit. 1763, you had Filipino seafarers settling in Louisiana. St. Malo, they called it.
Okay, but when did more organized migration start?
That really kicked off in 1906. Agricultural labor heading to Hawaii.
Oh, why Hawaii specific?
Well, at that time, both the Philippines and Hawaii were U.S. territories, essentially colonies. So that connection made movement easier, legally and logistically.
I see. U.S. connection.
And around the same time, you also had the arrival of Filipino scholars in the U.S. They were called pensionados, sent by the U.S. government to study.
Pensionados. So educated Filipinos were present early on. Did that maybe influence things later? How people were seen or the jobs available?
That's a really good question. It likely did. Having those educated individuals, the pensionados, probably helped create pathways, or at least a perception, for more professional migration down the line. It wasn't just about labor from the start.
Okay. So that's the first wave. setting some early foundations. What about the second?
Second wave really picks up after World War II. A big part of this was Filipino veterans who served with the U.S. military. They and their families, including war brides, were able to migrate to the U.S.
The post-war period.
Yes. And then the 1960s were huge. Major immigration reforms happened. Canada changed its laws in 62, the U.S. in 65, that was a big one, ending national quotas in Australia in 66. All of these basically eased restrictions on Asian immigration.
So the doors opened wider, essentially.
Much wider. Plus, Europe started its guest worker programs around then, too, and Filipino professionals, especially in healthcare, took advantage of those.
Nurses, maybe.
Nurses are a classic example, yes. This whole period, post-war, through the 60s and 70s, is really when that idea of the American dream, or similar dreams in Canada or Australia, became a tangible possibility for many Filipinos. And it continues. You see ESL teachers more recently, too.
Right. Okay, so that leads us into the third wave, starting around the 70s.
Exactly. The 1970s marked a major shift. You had high unemployment and economic difficulties in the Philippines.
The push factor again.
Right. And at the same time, you had the oil boom in the Middle East, massive construction projects, huge demand for labor-skilled, semi-skilled, all sorts.
So a huge pull factor from the Middle East.
Precisely. That drove a massive wave of contract labor there. But then the source notes, as we move into the 80s and 90s, the destinations started shifting again.
Where to?
Towards East and Southeast Asia. Think Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. Their economies were booming then.
Right, the Asian tigers.
Exactly. So the demand shifted geographically, and the types of jobs diversified, too. It wasn't just construction and engineering anymore.
What else opened up?
Domestic work became huge, as we mentioned, but also tourism, various service industries, healthcare continued to be big, and later technology sectors as well. Much broader range of occupations.
Paints a picture of incredible adaptability, really.
Yeah.
Following the opportunities.
It does. And while we tend to focus on these big labor flows, the source also touches on some maybe less discussed types of migration.
Like what?
Well, for instance, religious missionaries,
Oh.
Filipino priests, nuns, even whole missionary families going abroad.
Really? I hadn't considered that. Is it significant?
It's quite notable. The source gives the statistic. Filipinos are second only to India in the sheer number of Catholic religious sisters in Asia.
Wow. Second only to India.
Yeah. And apparently religious vocations are generally increasing in Asia. These Filipino missionaries often stay for quite a while, typically more than 3 years in their assigned countries.
That's fascinating. A whole different dimension. Anything else often overlooked?
The source also briefly mentions Filipinos marrying foreign nationals. Americans, Germans, Italians are given as examples. It acknowledges that these international marriages have, varied outcomes, some very happy, some facing difficulties, like any marriage, I suppose, but with added cross-cultural layers.
Right. It just adds to the complexity, doesn't it? It's not just about work.
Not at all. It's about lives, relationships, families, and that actually leads into a really interesting part of the source material. It suggests that if you only look at economics or social costs, you miss something deeper.
Okay. What's the deeper layer?
Understanding migration through core Filipino values, particularly the concept of loob.
Loob. L-O-O-B. What does that mean exactly?
It translates roughly to one's inner self or inner being. It's a foundational concept in Filipino psychology and culture. The source argues that understanding loob gives you a much richer insight into why people migrate and how they cope.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about loob. How does it break down?
So the source identifies 5 core values associated with it. First is kabutihang loob, often shortened to KBL.
KBL. Okay, what's that?
It means innate goodness, like a shared humanity, a sense of kindness deep down.
Innate goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. Second?
Kalenisang loob, or KLL. This is about purity of intention, honesty, transparency, sincerity.
KLL. Purity of intention. Got it. Third?
Kagandahang loob, KGL. This one is maybe more action-oriented. It means generosity, selflessness, acts of kindness, helping others.
KGL, generosity, kindness, and action. All right. Fourth?
Kapangyarihan,
Yeah.
KPR. This isn't just political power, it's broader. It means power, yes, but also authority, skills, capacity, talents, resources. Basically, your ability to do things, to make things happen.
KPR. Power and capacity. Okay. And the last one?
Katahimikan, KTH. This is the goal in many ways. It translates to peace, harmony, but also implies success, comfort, stability, a state of well-being.
KTH, peace, stability, success. Okay, so KBL, KLL, KGL, KPR, and KTH. That's quite a framework. How do they connect?
They're all interconnected. Think of lube as the core, the inner self. And these values are how that inner self is understood and expressed. The source explains it like your actions, the labas, or outside, are driven by this inner lube.
So the inside drives the outside.
Exactly. And the values link together. For example, that innate goodness, KBL, often shows itself through acts of generosity and selflessness, KGL.
Okay.
And demonstrating that generosity, KGL, proves your purity of intention,
Okay.
KBO.
I see. Your actions show your intent.
Right. And often your ability to be generous, KGL, depends on your skills and resources, your kapangyarihan, KPR.
Makes sense. You need the means to be generous.
Precisely. And ultimately, using your abilities, KPR, with good intentions, KLL, to help others, KGL, is all aimed at achieving that state of peace, harmony, and stability, the Katahimikan, KTH, both for oneself and, crucially, for one's family.
So that last one, Katahimikan, KTH, that sounds like it could be a really powerful driver for migration, doesn't it? That search for stability, a better life, peace for the family?
Absolutely. The source explicitly links KTH to the motivation to work abroad. It's not just about money in the abstract. It's about what that money represents: security, harmony, a better future, that state of Katahimikan for loved ones back home.
And maybe that helps explain the resilience you hear about, facing those 3D jobs or difficult situations?
I think that's exactly the connection the source makes. That pursuit of KTH fuels an incredible resilience. And there's a story in the article that just vividly illustrates this.
Oh, yeah.
It's an anecdote about a friend's mother. She worked in Milan, Italy for 30 years.
30 years, wow.
Yeah. And her journey there, it was intense. Apparently, she entered Italy illegally, went through Russia, was hidden in trucks, even car trunks,
Right.
walked across borders.
Oh, my goodness. That's incredible risk.
Incredible risk. But why did she do it? Her motivation was purely to provide for her children back in the Philippines, to give them a better future, that Katahimikan.
That really hits home. Using her own strength, her KPR, you could say.
Exactly. Her kapangyarihan, her determination, her resilience, enduring all that hardship, all in pursuit of KTH for her family, it perfectly shows these values in action.
That's a powerful example.
Right.
Are there others?
There's also an excerpt from a letter written by a Filipino migrant worker in Rome.
Okay.
She's caring for another family's child. And she writes about this moment, packing lunch for this child, and how it just triggers this intense wave of longing for her own children back home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she talks about hearing the child call her mama and how it's a constant, painful reminder of the separation. But even through that pain, her letter shows this deep dedication, this commitment to working for her family's well-being.
You really feel that sacrifice, don't you? That sounds like the Kabuti Hang Lube, the KBL, that selfless love in action.
Exactly. That innate goodness manifesting as profound sacrifice. Packing that lunch becomes this symbol of her love and her hardship.
And it connects to something else the source mentioned, the importance of recognition.
Yes, that's a crucial point. For many Filipino migrants, feeling that their family back home recognizes and appreciates their sacrifices is incredibly important.
Why is that so key?
It validates their efforts. It confirms that their actions are seen as expressions of that selfless love, that kabuti hang lube, even with all the challenges and distance. It closes that loop in a way.
I see. Feeling understood and valued by those you're doing it all for.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got the scale, the history, the economic drivers, and now these deep cultural values, the lube. Is there anything else the source brings in?
There is one more dimension, actually, and it's quite fascinating. It's about faith.
Faith. How does that fit in?
Well, the source talks about how the Catholic Church in particular has sometimes framed Filipino migrants almost as well as missionaries.
Missionaries, like intentionally spreading the faith.
Not necessarily intentionally, at least not initially for most. But there's this idea, or perhaps observation. The article mentions Pope Paul VI back in 1970 calling on Filipinos to be a light of Christ in Asia.
Okay.
And then Pope John Paul II in 1981 spoke about the Philippines having a special missionary vocation.
Interesting. But the source also said most people leave for economic reasons, right?
Yes, absolutely. It makes that clear. The primary driver is economic need, not a plan to evangelize. And, many Filipinos back home might identify as Catholic, but perhaps aren't deeply involved in the church, sometimes called nominal Catholics.
Right. So what changes when they go abroad?
This is where it gets really interesting. The source suggests that the experience of being away from home, often facing difficulties, maybe loneliness, it can lead to a kind of reawakening or deepening of faith for many.
Finding comfort or community.
Exactly. People often seek out Filipino chaplaincies or get involved in church activities abroad. It becomes a vital source of community, support, and meaning in a foreign land.
So it's less about going as missionaries and more about becoming more engaged with faith while they're there.
That seems to be the progression described. It often starts personally finding solace, maybe having a personal encounter with faith in the midst of challenges. Then that might lead to sharing their faith, perhaps just by how they live, first with fellow Filipinos, then maybe colleagues or others in the wider community they interact with.
So it's more of an organic witness than a planned mission.
Precisely. The source uses a quote from Benedict XVI to kind of capture this. He spoke about the world needing living signs of the presence of the risen Lord and credible witness. The idea is that the lived faith of these migrants, often developed or deepened while abroad, can serve as that kind of witness.
That adds a really unexpected layer to the whole picture.
It really does. It shows how migration touches every aspect of life, even the spiritual.
Okay, so wrapping things up for this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. The sheer scale, first off.
Yeah.
Millions of people, hundreds of countries.
Huge scale. And the diversity: permanent settlers, temporary OFWs, undocumented workers.
And the history of those three waves shaping the flows over centuries, really, from 1417.
Right, up to the modern shifts towards Asia and diverse job sectors.
And we dug into those core values, the lube, especially that driving force of Katahimikan, the search for peace and stability for the family.
Understanding KBL, KLL, KGL, KPR, and KTH really adds depth beyond just economics.
Illustrated by those powerful stories, the mother going to Milan, the worker in Rome.
Yeah, those really bring the sacrifices and motivations to life.
And finally, this unexpected dimension of faith. How migration can spark a spiritual journey and have this sort of unintentional missionary aspect.
It definitely shows that Filipino migration is so much more than just labor statistics, isn't it? It's woven deeply into personal stories, cultural identity, family bonds, even faith.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away. Building on all this, how do you think these really personal motivations, these core values like Katahimikan and Kabutihang Lube, actually shape how Filipino migrants integrate or don't integrate in their host countries? How does it affect their cultural impact?
Or maybe think about how that missionary aspect, even if unintentional, plays out in different places, especially very secular ones. How does that manifest day to day?
Yeah. It really prompts you to think about the individual human experiences behind those massive numbers, doesn't it? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.